I could feel her eyes burning into the back of my head. My mother-in-law, Patricia Whitmore Sterling. That's right, she hyphenated both her maiden name and her married name because God forbid anyone forget she came from old money. She was sitting 3 rows behind me in the conference hall, and I didn't need to turn around to know exactly what expression was on her face. That tight-lipped smile, the one she always wore when she was about to say something she'd later claim was just concern. But this time was different, because the woman on stage, the Forbes senior editor with the sleek bob and Louboutins, had just called my name. She said, "And now, I'd like to invite our next featured entrepreneur to the stage. She's been called one of the most disruptive forces in commercial real estate development, and at just 32 years old, she's closed what industry insiders are calling the deal of the decade. Please welcome Maya Sterling." I stood up and smoothed down my custom Sergio Hudson blazer, the emerald green one that made my skin glow like I was dipped in gold. Then I walked toward that stage like I owned it. Because technically, I did. I'd sponsored this entire summit. Let me back up. 6 years ago, I married into what people call Boston Brahmin society. You know the type. Families whose money is so old it has cobwebs. People who summer in Martha's Vineyard and winter in Aspen and think Whole Foods is urban grocery shopping. My husband, Jonathan, was different, or so I thought. We met at Harvard Business School. I was there on a full scholarship, first person in my family to even finish college, let alone get an MBA. He was there because his grandfather's name was on the library. But Jonathan didn't act like that mattered. He saw me. Not where I came from, not the fact that I grew up in Roxbury in a 3-bedroom apartment with 7 people, not that my mom cleaned houses to put food on the table. He saw me. Or again, so I thought. The problem started exactly 3 weeks after our wedding. We were at the Whitmore Sterling summer house in Cape Cod. 18 bedrooms overlooking the ocean, the kind of place that has a name. They called it Windermere. I called it a museum where people were afraid to sit on the furniture. Patricia was hosting her annual garden party. 200 guests, all white linen and passive aggression. I wore a cream Prada sundress. I'd saved for months for that dress. I looked stunning. Patricia took one look at me and said, loud enough for the women near the rose garden to hear, "Well, isn't that bold? I suppose where you come from, cream is appropriate for afternoon events?" I smiled and sipped my champagne and said nothing. Jonathan squeezed my hand and whispered, "Just ignore her. She's old-fashioned." Old-fashioned. That's what he called it. It got worse. At Thanksgiving, Patricia asked me, in front of the entire family, if I knew how to use the silver correctly, or if I needed a tutorial. At Christmas, she gave me a gift card to Marshall's. Everyone else got Cartier. When Jonathan and I bought our first house, a beautiful brownstone in Back Bay, that I picked out, that I negotiated the price on, that I secured the mortgage because my credit score was better than his, Patricia walked through it exactly once. She touched the marble countertops in the kitchen and looked at the custom lighting I'd installed and the art I'd collected from Black artists in Atlanta and LA. And then she said, "It's very urban. I suppose you're comfortable with this aesthetic?" Urban. That was her favorite word for me. Urban meant Black. Urban meant poor. Urban meant not good enough for her son. And Jonathan would just laugh it off and say, "Mom doesn't mean anything by it. She's just from a different generation." But here's what broke me. We were at their annual New Year's Eve gala. Black tie event. I wore Valentino. My hair was done by the same stylist who works with Beyonce's team when she's in Boston. I looked like money incarnate. I was standing near the champagne fountain, talking to one of Jonathan's cousins about a development project I was consulting on, when I heard Patricia's voice behind me. She was talking to her sister, Aunt Cordelia, and she didn't know I could hear her. Patricia said, and this was the worst part, "I just don't understand what Jonathan sees in her. She's so rough around the edges. You can take the girl out of the projects, but you can't take the projects out of the girl." Cordelia actually laughed. Then Cordelia asked, "Does she even have a trust fund? Or is Jonathan expected to support her like some kind of charity case?" My hand tightened around my champagne flute as I kept listening. Patricia said, "And this was the worst part. Well, at least she hasn't gotten pregnant yet. Can you imagine? Project Trash Jeans mixing with the Whitmore line." I turned around. Both of them saw me. Patricia's face didn't even change. She just smiled that tight smile and said, "Maya, darling, we were just talking about the caterer. The shrimp are divine, don't you think?" I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I stared at myself in the mirror for a long moment, and I made a decision right there. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg Jonathan to defend me. I was going to win. Here's what Patricia Whitmore Sterling didn't know about me. I wasn't just some scholarship kid who got lucky. I was hungry. While Jonathan coasted through his MBA on his family name, I was working 3 side hustles. I was consulting for startups. I was flipping properties in neighborhoods people like Patricia were afraid to drive through. I saw what was coming. Boston was changing. The neighborhoods that had been redlined for decades were being rezoned. Developers were circling. And I had connections those developers didn't have because I grew up there. I knew the community leaders. I knew the church groups. I knew who actually had influence. So while Patricia was calling me urban, I was quietly building an empire. I started small, a duplex in Dorchester, then a triple-decker in Mattapan. I renovated them, but I didn't gentrify them. I kept them affordable. I hired local contractors. I built relationships. And then I met Marcus Thompson. Marcus was a developer out of Atlanta, Black-owned firm, $50 million in annual revenue. He was looking to expand to Boston, but he didn't have the community trust. I did. We partnered on a project, then another, then another. Within 3 years, I had equity in 12 properties. My personal net worth hit 8 figures, and I never told Jonathan, not because I was hiding it, but because he never asked. He assumed I was doing cute little consulting projects. He'd pat my head when I talked about work and say, "That's great, babe. My girl's keeping busy." Keeping busy. Meanwhile, I was closing deals that would make his trust fund look like lunch money. Then came the Seaport Project. The Seaport District in Boston, billion-dollar waterfront development. Luxury condos, commercial space, retail, the kind of project that puts you on the map. There was one last parcel of land available. Historic site, complicated zoning. The big developers had been trying to get it for years, but the community kept blocking them. Marcus called me and said, "Maya, this is it. This is the legacy play, but we need $80 million to close." $80 million. I sat in my home office, the one Patricia said looked too modern, and I made calls. I pulled in investors from my network. I structured the deal so the community got ownership stakes. I got the zoning approved, and I closed it. $80 million. The biggest commercial real estate acquisition in Boston that year. My name was on the paperwork, my company, Sterling Development Group. Yeah, I kept Jonathan's last name for business because why not? Let them Google me and see exactly who I was. Forbes reached out 2 weeks later. They wanted to feature me in their 30 Under 40 issue. They wanted to interview me at the Women Entrepreneur Summit, the summit that Patricia had tickets to, because of course she did. Patricia collected women's empowerment events like she collected art. It made her feel progressive. I RSVP'd yes. I didn't tell Jonathan. I didn't tell anyone. I just bought a custom emerald suit, booked the best suite at the Four Seasons, and prepared my speech. So there I was, walking onto that stage. The Forbes editor smiled at me and said, "Maya, congratulations on the Seaport deal. $80 million. You've been called one of the most influential developers in New England. How does it feel?" I took the microphone and looked out at the audience, and I saw her, Patricia, 3 rows back. Her face was white. She hadn't known any of this. I said, "It feels like vindication." The editor laughed and said, "That's a strong word. Tell us more." I smiled and said, "I grew up in Roxbury. My mother cleaned houses. We lived in subsidized housing. I was told many times that I didn't belong in certain spaces, that I was too urban, too rough around the edges. But here's what I learned. When people underestimate you, when they think you're not worthy, you don't argue with them. You don't beg them to see your value. You just build. And then you let your success do the talking." The room erupted in applause. Patricia sat there completely frozen. The editor leaned in and asked, "Your company is now valued at over $120 million. You're one of the largest Black-owned development firms in the Northeast. What's next?" I could have been humble. I could have been gracious. But I looked directly at Patricia and said, "What's next? I'm acquiring the Whitmore Plaza." There was dead silence in the room. The Whitmore Plaza was Patricia's family's crown jewel, a historic office building in downtown Boston. They'd owned it for 3 generations, but they've been hemorrhaging money for years. Bad management, outdated systems. They were desperate to sell, but they wanted to keep it in the right hands. Translation, white hands. I continued. "I closed that deal yesterday, $110 million, all cash. The building will be renamed the Roxbury Legacy Center. We're converting half of it into affordable office space for minority-owned businesses." Then I smiled and said, "I think it's a beautiful full-circle moment, don't you?" After the panel, I didn't go to the networking reception. I went back to my suite and poured myself a glass of Class A Roederer. I sat by the window overlooking the Boston skyline. My phone rang. It was Jonathan. I answered. He said, "Maya," his voice was strained, "my mother just called me. She's very upset." I said calmly, "I imagine she is." He said, "You bought the plaza without telling me? That's my family's building." I replied, "No, Jonathan, it was your family's building. Now it's mine. Legally purchased, all above board. Your mother's lawyers already confirmed the sale." There was silence on the line. Then he asked, "Why didn't you tell me about any of this? The company, the money?" I took a sip of champagne and said, "Because you never asked. In 6 years of marriage, you never once asked about my work beyond, 'How was your day, babe?' You never asked to see my portfolio. You never asked to meet my business partners. You assumed I was playing at entrepreneurship while you were the real breadwinner." He started to say, "That's not fair," but I cut him off and said, "Your mother called me Project Trash, Jonathan." He went quiet. I continued, "She said I wasn't good enough for the Whitmore line. She said my genes weren't worthy. And you told me she was just old-fashioned. You told me to ignore it." He said, "Maya, I'm sorry." I said, "I don't need your apology. I needed your support. 6 years ago, I needed you to stand up for me, to tell your mother that I was brilliant and capable and worthy. But you didn't. So I decided to prove it myself." I stood up and looked at my reflection in the window. Then I said, "I'm filing for divorce. You'll have the papers tomorrow." He said, "What? Maya, no, we can work this out." I told him, "There's nothing to work out. I've outgrown you, Jonathan. I've outgrown this marriage. I've outgrown needing permission to take up space." Then I hung up. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. I kept the brownstone. Jonathan moved back to Windermere. Patricia refused to speak to me. which honestly made everything easier. The Roxbury Legacy Center opened 6 months after that. We had a ribbon-cutting ceremony, the mayor came, the governor sent a letter. My mother, who'd spent 30 years cleaning other people's houses, got to cut the ribbon. She wore a purple dress from Neiman Marcus. I'd bought it for her. She looked like royalty. She whispered to me as cameras flashed, "I'm so proud of you, baby." I hugged her tight and said, "I did this for us, Mama, for everyone who was ever told they didn't belong." Forbes put me on the cover 4 months later. The headline read, "From the projects to the penthouse, how Maya Sterling built a real estate empire." Patricia saw it. I know she did because Aunt Cordelia posted a very carefully worded congratulations on Facebook that Patricia clearly forced her to write. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because here's the truth about revenge. The best kind isn't loud. It isn't petty. It isn't about making someone suffer. The best revenge is becoming so successful, so undeniable, so powerful that the people who doubted you have no choice but to say your name. And when they do, when they're forced to acknowledge that the woman they called Project Trash is now the woman who owns the building their family lost, that's when you smile. That's when you sip your champagne. And that's when you remind yourself, I didn't need their approval. I just needed their underestimation. Because while they were busy looking down on me, I was busy rising. And now they have to look up. Last week, I got an invitation in the mail. Patricia's annual garden party at Windermere. The note said, "It would mean so much if you could attend. We'd love to celebrate your success." I RSVP'd yes. I'm wearing Bottega Veneta, and I'm bringing my mother as my +1. Let's see if Patricia comments on that aesthetic.
So tell me, did I go too far buying her family's building? Or did Patricia get exactly what she deserved? Let me know in the comments.